The number was $30 billion. That was the hidden cost. The truth concealed behind the practiced smile and the political euphemisms. The House Agriculture Committee was not supposed to be the stage for a public execution of political credibility. But when Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped up, the gentle dance of policy discussion quickly became a hostile interrogation. Her target, Representative Glenn Thompson, the confident Republican architect of a farm bill claiming to strengthen SNAP while secretly gutting it. This was a systematic demolition of a meticulously constructed political lie, broadcast live, proving that accountability still exists when one member refuses to accept anything less than the unvarnished truth. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell, because the following events reveal exactly how easy it is for politicians to mask devastating budget cuts and how crucial it is to have fact-checkers holding the microphone. For half an hour, Thompson had preached the gospel of efficiency. He lectured the committee on program integrity and eliminating fraud and waste. Relying on the classic Republican playbook that suggested massive benefit reductions were simply cleaning up the system. He was counting on the sheer complexity of policy to shield the core fact. His proposal starved the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. But Jasmine Crockett had done her homework. She wasn't carrying a talking point, she was carrying the CBO report, the government's own nonpartisan analysis, and the numbers were damning. She waited for her turn, holding the central contradiction like a loaded weapon. Mr. Thompson, her voice cut through the room's polite tension. Your party has repeatedly claimed that the proposed farm bill implements no cuts to SNAP. However, the Congressional Budget Office has provided a precise financial assessment of your proposal. I ask you directly, what is the CBO's calculated reduction in SNAP spending over the next 10 years? The shift in the room was palpable. Thompson's confidence vanished instantly, replaced by the panicked look of a man suddenly caught in the spotlight without a script. His first instinct was evasion, citing that the CBO score is based on certain assumptions. It was the perfect bureaucratic smokescreen. But Jasmine was prepared for it. Hit that like button if you appreciate a politician who refuses to be derailed by spin. With all due respect, I did not ask for a philosophical assessment of CBO's methodology. Jasmine swiftly countered, her tone sharp and unyielding. I asked for the figure. The number. What is the precise dollar amount of the SNAP reduction calculated by the Congressional Budget Office? Thompson tried to pivot to the bill's overall cost neutrality, a desperate attempt to drown the specific cut in a sea of irrelevant accounting. But the question was surgical and specific. We are focusing solely on SNAP. Mr. Thompson, Jasmine stated flatly, the CBO projection. State the number of the reduction over 10 years. The chamber was silent. Every eye was on Thompson, who now realized he was trapped. The evasion had failed. The lie could no longer be sustained. Make sure you are subscribed, because the moment of admission is the true climax. Reluctantly, forced by the unblinking eye of the camera and the facts, Thompson conceded the truth. The CBO analysis projected a reduction of approximately $30 billion. $30 billion, Jasmine repeated, ensuring the immense figure resonated throughout the room and across the broadcast. The repetition turned Thompson's quiet admission into a resounding declaration of guilt. So, when you and your colleagues have spent the morning stating there are no cuts to SNAP, what you actually mean is a $30 billion reduction, which you are attempting to redefine as something else. Is that accurate? The Republican congressman's face flushed red as he attempted to regroup, desperately searching for a way to spin his way out of the factual hole he had dug. He argued that Jasmine was mischaracterizing the policy, insisting that the bill was not cutting benefits for people who are truly eligible. Tell me in the comments if you think $30 billion counts as a cut. Or if Thompson was right that it's merely a mischaracterization. But Jasmine was utterly unimpressed by his semantic games. You are cutting $30 billion from the program. She countered flatly. That is not a characterization, that is math. CBO states your bill reduces SNAP spending by $30 billion over 10 years. That is a cut. You can package it in language about eligibility and efficiency. But the absolute bottom line is $30 billion fewer dollars going toward helping people afford food. Why is it so impossible for you to say that plainly? Faced with the undeniable number, Thompson made his second critical error. He attempted to shift the entire premise of the discussion, pivoting abruptly to rhetoric about work requirements and able-bodied adults without dependents. But Jasmine was ready, having anticipated the exact deflection. Mr. Thompson, let me redirect. You represent Pennsylvania's 15th district, correct? Thompson offered a weary nod, uncertain but sensing the danger of this new line of inquiry. Your district is largely rural, characterized by small towns and some economically struggling areas. Jasmine continued, establishing the demographic ground truth. What percentage of your constituents rely on SNAP benefits? Do you know? He stammered, admitting he would have to look at the exact numbers. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because Jasmine was about to drop devastating facts about Thompson's own constituents. Let me assist you, she replied, pulling up specific data on her tablet with the calm, prepared precision of a scholar. According to USDA statistics, approximately 14% of your district receives SNAP benefits. That figure is higher than the national average. Rural districts like yours, in fact, often show higher SNAP utilization rates than many urban districts. She let the information hang in the air, allowing the irony to settle, before delivering the final, crushing question. So, when you champion a bill that cuts $30 billion from SNAP, you are directly harming a program that disproportionately helps your own constituents. Does that represent good leadership, Mr. Thompson? The Democratic side of the committee surged with energy. Thompson looked cornered, struggling visibly to formulate a response that didn't sound like he was arguing against the welfare of the very people who elected him. Hit that like button if you believe politicians should represent their constituents instead of cutting programs their own voters rely on. Thompson attempted desperately to recover. He tried to pivot back to his rural bona fides, asserting that the Republican bill included provisions that help rural communities. But Jasmine refused to allow him to change the focal point. Your bill cuts $30 billion from SNAP, she repeated, refusing to let him sidestep the central financial fact. I am not inquiring about tangential provisions. I am asking about the specific impact of cutting food assistance when your district relies on that program more than most. How do you justify that to constituents who are going to suffer losses in benefits? Thompson was visibly shaken, struggling to formulate any coherent defense that didn't directly contradict the interests of his own voters. In a desperate move, he resorted to the classic deflection used when conservatives are trapped on social spending. He shifted the blame to the national debt. He suggested that Jasmine should explain how Democrats plan to address the massive national debt that programs like SNAP contribute to. It was a calculated, last-ditch attempt to paint Jasmine and the Democrats as fiscally irresponsible for opposing cuts to essential food assistance. Thompson believed he was being clever, turning the tables to put his interrogator on the defensive regarding government spending. But Jasmine Crockett had been waiting for precisely this maneuver, and her counter-response was absolutely devastating. Comment below if you think Thompson just made a huge mistake bringing up the national debt. Oh, you want to discuss the national debt? Let us discuss it, Mr. Thompson, she announced, her voice gaining an authoritative edge. How much did the national debt increase during the previous administration? Thompson looked like he had walked into a second, more damaging ambush. I do not have those figures immediately available, he admitted weakly. Allow me to assist you again, Jasmine replied, her tone leaving no doubt that she was fully prepared for this exact line of argument. The national debt increased by approximately $8 trillion during that administration. $8 trillion. She then delivered the crucial connection. And you voted for the policies that caused the vast majority of that increase, the tax cuts that disproportionately benefited the wealthy and corporations. The spending increases that were not offset. You voted for all of that. She leaned forward, projecting both moral authority and factual precision. Therefore, please do not lecture me about fiscal responsibility while you are simultaneously trying to strip food assistance away from struggling families in your own district to pay for tax cuts you already delivered to billionaires. Make sure you're subscribed because this systematic destruction was about to expose the deep hypocrisy in Republican spending priorities. The room erupted in murmurs. Democratic members nodded vigorously, and the Republican side scrambled, conferring urgently with their staff. Thompson looked utterly defeated. His attempts to respond with vague phrases about different economic circumstances and necessary investments lacked any conviction. He was speaking in fragments, not arguments. But Jasmine was far from finished. Here is what remains incomprehensible. Mr. Thompson, she pressed, when we are discussing tax cuts for the wealthy, fiscal responsibility seems irrelevant. When we are discussing massive defense spending increases, fiscal responsibility is ignored. But when the conversation shifts to helping people, particularly poor people, particularly people in the rural areas your party claims to champion, suddenly we are told we must find cuts. Suddenly, $30 billion in food assistance is deemed unaffordable. Why is this disparity the standard? Thompson tried to draw a distinction, arguing that defense spending and tax policy were fundamentally different from nutrition assistance programs. But he was completely on the defensive, unable to provide a substantive answer that wasn't rooted in ideology rather than mathematics. Tell me in the comments if you think it is hypocritical to only worry about government spending when it helps poor people. Chak Chan Roy, Doi de la Fan 4. Tap Trung Vau Viek Jasmine Crockett Dua Ra Con So Kuoi Kung De Ket Thuk Quoc Doi Do. Jasmine Crockett had taken complete control of the exchange, not through volume, but through sheer, relentless factual preparation. She was about to press her advantage with one final, devastating question that cut through all of Thompson's political spin. Let me give you one more number to consider. Mr. Thompson, she stated, her voice returning to its calm, precise tone. Do you know how much we spend annually on SNAP? What is the total program cost? Thompson simply shook his head slightly, clearly unwilling to guess a figure after being proven wrong and looking foolish on every previous number. He had learned his caution the hard way. It is approximately $80 billion annually. Jasmine informed the committee. That sounds like a large number, correct? But in the context of the federal budget, that is less than 1% of the entire federal budget. 1% to help feed 40 million Americans, which includes millions of children, elderly citizens, and individuals with disabilities. She allowed that crucial comparison to sink in. 1% of the budget to feed 40 million people. And you are telling this committee, and the American public, that we cannot afford that? She challenged. But simultaneously, we can afford to add $8 trillion to the national debt through tax cuts for individuals who are already wealthy? Hit that like button if you think 1% of the budget to feed 40 million Americans is money well spent. Jasmine leaned in, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a moral clarity that transcended partisan politics, driving straight to the core of the issue. Here is the reality, Mr. Thompson. SNAP is not a handout. It is not wasteful spending. It is empirically one of the most effective anti-poverty programs available to us. It reduces food insecurity. It directly aids children in performing better in school. It provides critical stability to families during economic downturns. She then delivered the financial counter-argument that demolished Thompson's claim of fiscal responsibility. The return on investment for this program is statistically positive. Every dollar spent on SNAP generates approximately $1.50 in broader economic activity. The revelation was designed to expose the absurdity of the Republican position. Therefore, she concluded, her voice sharp and conclusive, cutting $30 billion from this specific program is not fiscal responsibility. It is fiscal stupidity. It is actively harming your own constituents and damaging your own district's economy purely to satisfy an ideological point about government spending. Thompson attempted one final, desperate defense of his legislation, weakly asserting that the Republican bill simply ensures that people who can work do work. But Jasmine was finished with his rhetorical evasions. Your bill cuts $30 billion from food assistance, she repeated, her patience now fully depleted. Stop concealing your actions behind rhetoric about work requirements and just own what you are doing. You are removing $30 billion worth of food assistance from people who desperately need it. That will inflict pain on people. It will harm children. It will hurt the elderly. It will harm people in your own district. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the conclusion of this systematic destruction is essential viewing. And no amount of vague talk about efficiency or integrity changes that basic mathematical fact, she finalized. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Thompson had exhausted his defenses. He had been systematically dismantled, his talking points exposed as shallow lies. His fiscal responsibility argument revealed as complete hypocrisy. And his claim of no cuts, utterly demolished by his own admission of the $30 billion CBO figure. He sat there, visibly uncomfortable, while Jasmine calmly gathered her papers. Having accomplished her mission of public accountability. Tuyet voi, doi de la fan 5. Tap trung vau hao qua chin tri va su lan trian kua video. Dan do su that bai kua chien luok, kich banku. The committee chairman, sensing the disaster that had unfolded for the Republican side, quickly moved to recognize another member for questioning. But the damage was already irreparable. The careful narrative Republicans had constructed, that their farm bill was reasonable. That it strengthened SNAP rather than cutting it, and that concerns about cuts were mere Democratic exaggeration, had been utterly destroyed. It took only one congresswoman asking simple questions and refusing to accept anything less than direct, factual answers. Within hours, video clips of the exchange were circulating widely across social media platforms. Crockett destroys Thompson on SNAP cuts immediately became a trending topic on political Twitter. Anti-hunger advocacy organizations immediately shared the video, framing the confrontation as the exact type of accountability required from members of Congress. Even commentators typically aligned with conservative views, while attempting to criticize Jasmine's politics, were forced to acknowledge that Thompson had been completely outmaneuvered and that his attempt to hide behind talking points was a monumental failure. Thompson's office released a frantic statement later that day, claiming the exchange had been taken out of context, and alleging that the congresswoman had misrepresented the Republican Farm Bill proposal. But the statement was powerless against the central, undeniable fact established on camera by Thompson's own mouth. CBO analysis confirmed the bill cut $30 billion from SNAP. And he had been forced to admit it. Everything else was simply damage control after getting caught lying. Hit that like button if you think Thompson's office statement was purely an exercise in political damage control. For Jasmine Crockett, the confrontation served as the perfect example of her approach to congressional oversight. The method was simple yet devastatingly effective. Come prepared with facts, ask direct, specific questions, refuse to accept evasive answers, and force opponents to acknowledge realities they would prefer to obscure. She did not need to resort to yelling, performative outrage, or personal attacks. She simply knew the numbers better than her opponent and was willing to persistently pursue the truth, even when it led to profound political discomfort for the person she was questioning. In a follow-up interview, she articulated exactly why she had pressed Thompson so relentlessly on the $30 billion figure. She explained that he was attempting to convince the public that cutting $30 billion from food assistance wasn't actually cutting $30 billion from food assistance. He was counting on people failing to pay close enough attention to notice the contradiction. My job, she continued, is to pay attention and to ensure the public knows what is actually being proposed versus what is merely being claimed. $30 billion in cuts is $30 billion in cuts, regardless of what euphemism you attach to it. And people absolutely deserve to know that before this bill is allowed to pass. Make sure you are subscribed because politicians must realize that someone is watching and fact-checking their every statement. The viral spread demonstrated a fundamental breakdown in the old political communication model. Thompson's polished, talking point strategy about strengthening SNAP might have worked in an earlier era, where sound bites were brief and detailed follow-up questions were rare. But in the current digital landscape, where entire committee exchanges go viral, where fact-checkers have instant access to CBO scores and official government data, and where constituents can instantly look up how policies affect their own districts, the old playbook of spin is completely obsolete. Voters now expect straight answers to direct questions. They demand their representatives be honest about the policy reality of their bills, rather than hiding behind technical language and euphemisms designed only to obscure the truth. Thompson learned this lesson in the most humiliating way possible, on camera. Broadcast to millions, his attempt to argue that $30 billion in reductions were not cuts became a masterclass in how not to handle congressional oversight in the digital age. Tell me in the comments if you think social media and viral videos are forcing politicians to be more honest or simply encouraging them to be better at avoiding direct questions. Tuyat voi, doi de la fan 6. Fan ket luan kua kao choyan. Tap trung vau kak he qua lao dai va bai hok ve tin min bok trong chin tri hin dai. The broader implications of this highly publicized exchange extended far beyond one committee hearing or the fate of a single bill. It represented a fundamental and irreversible shift in how congressional accountability operates in the digital age. When members of Congress realize that their exchanges, evasive answers, or contradictory statements might be viewed by millions and subjected to instant, relentless fact-checking, it fundamentally alters the calculation of political communication. Politicians can no longer rely on the assumption that the average voter is oblivious to the technical details of policy debates. The Jasmine Crockett approach, thorough preparation with specific, verifiable data, unyielding persistence in demanding direct answers, and the complete rejection of political spin, is rapidly becoming the new standard for effective oversight. Politicians who attempt to cling to the outdated playbook of evasion and deflection are increasingly finding themselves exposed and humiliated on national platforms. Make sure you're subscribed because this level of accountability is essential for a functioning democracy. For Thompson, this moment was immediately and permanently defining. The video showing him forced to admit his bill cut $30 billion from food assistance, despite his claims of no cuts, became required viewing for anyone studying political communication failure. His attempt to play semantic games with a program vital to struggling families backfired spectacularly, turning a routine hearing into a viral embarrassment that severely damaged his political credibility. The core lesson for his peers was stark. If you propose policies that cut benefits for struggling families, at least have the courage to be honest about the action. Do not attempt to hide behind euphemisms when someone like Crockett is checking your facts in real time. The political fallout was swift and widespread. The Democratic Party immediately used the exchange as a template for oversight, studying the video to identify the key elements, data preparation and persistent focus, that made Jasmine's strategy so effective. Conversely, Republican staffers realized the necessity of preparing their members to answer direct questions about official CBO scores and policy minutiae, rather than solely relying on generalized talking points. The viral spread served as a profound lesson in civic education for American voters. Many learned crucial details about SNAP's function, its cost as a mere 1% of the federal budget, and how legislative proposals are objectively analyzed by the CBO. The moment provided a clear, usable example of how to evaluate political claims by demanding specific data and comparing what politicians say to what official government analysis shows. Tell me in the comments if you think this kind of viral accountability is making politics more honest or if politicians are just getting better at avoiding situations where they might be fact-checked. The long-term impact on congressional behavior continues to unfold, but the immediate effect was undeniable. Politicians who seek to obscure the true impacts of their policies behind misleading language and spin face dramatically greater risks of public exposure and political consequences than ever before. Jasmine Crockett's decisive victory demonstrated a critical truth. Effective political accountability doesn't require outrage, it requires preparation, mathematics, and the moral commitment to force powerful people to acknowledge the uncomfortable realities they would rather hide. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because moments like this show us exactly what effective oversight and political accountability can look like when someone comes prepared and refuses to accept spin as an answer to important questions that affect millions of American families.